So it's the remedy hearing for Dr Ranson, and covering the events for us and giving us his opinion on the whole proceedings is, of course, Chris Robertshaw. Chris, quite a few interesting things have come out on day one, of course, which has been postponed from yesterday.
Well, yeah, interesting is one way of putting it. I mean, just a very quick little run through the background for this, for those who aren't thoroughly familiar with it. The remedy hearing is a culmination of a lot of activity that's been going on a long time in this case, but very quickly, Rosalind Ranson, the Chief Medical Officer of the DHSC in the Isle of Man, won hands down her case when she brought it to the tribunal. Of that, there was not a hesitation or a doubt that she won hands down. Also, as a consequence of that, there was the most extraordinary implosion within senior government, where heads rolled left, right and centre. At that time, at the end of that process, through a loss of integrity, although the reasons why these various people suddenly had to retire or leave was never made fully clear, but it was, for those who'd followed the case from the beginning, the reasons behind it were clear. At that time, the view many of us held, and I was certainly amongst that group, was that there was no way that the government would consider appealing what was a cut and dried case in favour of Rosalind Ranson. What did they do? They appealed twice to Deemster One's High Court, the appeal court, failed miserably and embarrassed themselves. So you would have thought that by this time, when you got to the remedy hearing, that we would have a rational and fair exchange of opinions trying to find a fair settlement. We didn't get that this morning. We had the government side, what they would call the respondents, quite honestly attacked Rosalind Ranson from 10 o'clock in the morning right the way through, with an hour's lunch break, through to 4 o'clock in the evening. They did their damnedest to diminish and discredit Rosalind Ranson on all counts. And if I may, I'd like to run through some of those areas with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, before we start that, can we just also mention at some point that the Expol investigation finally came in, but surprise, surprise, it didn't find much.
No, it didn't. That's what we're told. We can't question that. Rosalind Ranson did quite reasonably, though, say, well, the report came in, it was paid for and commissioned by the respondents, by government, and effectively the appellant, Rosalind Ranson, wasn't really part of that process. So her argument was, well, one can't challenge it, but was it completely impartial? But if we can move on from that, today was really the day when the government side, the Department of Health and Social Care side, through their advocates and through a new, what we've got to call KCs now rather than QCs, led by a pretty aggressive guy who tried to discredit Rosalind Ranson on a whole range of areas. And I'll start with the financial side. They tried to suggest that she was unreasonable in her claims. We don't know what Rosalind Ranson, at least I don't know, what constitutes the appropriate settlement for Rosalind Ranson, but one can read into the criticism of her levelled by the department as to what those areas are. So the first one was the financial element of the settlement, trying to suggest that somehow she was being greedy or over-demanding. Personally, I found their arguments weak, and I don't want to spend too much time on them, but because this is the first exchange you and I have had on this matter, and it will run now for 3 days, up to and including Friday. So there'll be, all being well, we'll cover each day as we go on. But the arguments were very weak, but again, erring towards the aggressive. And then they moved on to areas of her health and well-being. In other words, one can read from that Rosalind Ranson, in my subjective opinion, quite reasonably, is saying that the traumatic experience of her employment with the DHSC from soon after she arrived right the way through to the end was an incredibly distressing and difficult thing for her to deal with, and resulted in damaging her health. And the KC's argument on behalf of the department was to, I can only describe it as being a violation of her privacy, so much so that there had to be at one point an opportunity for Rosalind to leave the room and to recover her well-being before she came back because she broke down. In fact, she broke down twice in the morning. Yes, both in the morning, I think. And that sort of clearly evidenced the degree of aggression in the questioning. You know, listening to it, you would think that somehow Rosalind Ranson was in the dock, and the accusatorial approach of the department gave you the impression that they were the innocent party trying to find the guilt in Rosalind Ranson, and how far that was removed from the reality, which was that government was found wanting in so many areas and in so many ways. And Rosalind Ranson was the person who brought this to public attention, the whistleblower.
Yeah, but Chris, we're talking about over £6 million that she's initially come up with as a starting point. And these things are negotiations, aren't they? But she says she's worth over £6 million to work until into her 70s, right?
Well, a remedy hearing obviously should be a negotiation, a settlement based on a negotiation. But what we heard today wasn't that. It was an out-and-out attempt to discredit Rosalind Ranson in every way and at every level. And I quite clear in my own mind that that's not the right way forward. Remember that she is a whistleblower, and I was left with the thought after the day concluded: is this the way we treat whistleblowers? In other words, government is declaring at every opportunity and at every juncture that it believes that it's important to treat whistleblowers properly, appropriately, and with the necessary respect. And yet, right the way through this process, from the very beginning up to and including today, the way Rosalind Ranson's been treated by government is, in her words, and I agree with it, a form of violation. She's been violated. And I can't imagine that government is going to be in any way or shape or form treated with respect when it says we respect the whistleblower until such time as a genuine whistleblower with a high level of integrity is treated with the appropriate respect. The way she was treated today was simply not acceptable. They even challenged things like, for example, her commitment to the Isle of Man. At one point, they said, but you applied for the job as chief medical officer in Scotland whilst you were in employment in the Isle of Man. And she said, yes. She said, I did. And that she did well in that application, didn't finally get the job. I think she said she was actually interviewed by Chris Whitty, which is fairly ironic in the circumstances. She didn't finally get the job, but that was her trying to escape the awful situation she found herself in the Isle of Man.
Okay, now
in their sort of deluded argument, somehow that was she was exhibiting a lack of commitment to the Isle of Man, and that sort of warped, deformed argument offered there, it's beyond belief.
Now, she went on the attack in the sense that she had criticism of the chief minister has to deal with that one. They had a meeting, but she doesn't think he's handled it very well.
Well, I think that no, the general view I took from that was that she feels she hasn't been treated with regard to her effectively protecting her reputation. And the key example she gave was that although on the face of it, the government has recognised the tribunal's judgment, nonetheless, beyond the point of that judgment being made public, there were still significant hesitations and obfuscation by ministers after that. And one of the examples that I would draw your attention to was, I think it was an interview that you had with Laurie Hooper, and he was defending one of these ridiculous appeals. And he said to you, if you can recall this, he said, "Oh well," he said, "I can't say anything," but he said, "It will all come out in due course." And that was Rosalind Ranson's argument, was that inferred that somehow, somewhere, despite the judgment of the tribunal, despite what had been said in public by government officially, that in reality, no, we really don't trust this and we are concerned. And that's how I took it at the time. So I can only concur with Rosalind Ranson's view that there was a low-level insidious inference towards her credibility right the way through. And in a way, that was manifested today in the way government treated her in the tribunal, completely unnecessary.
And Dr. Alex Allison also, he was brought into it today by the Ranson side?
Yes, I think, yes, correct. I think that was, there's a great sense of hurt on Rosalind's part, and who would blame her for that? Her feeling, you were talking about ministers generally, the feeling that she simply, in reality, hasn't been supported in a way that she, or acknowledged, I think is perhaps a better word, acknowledged and responded to fairly and openly in the way that she would consider appropriate. And actually, I agree with her.
So what do we take away from day one? I mean, this is obviously the first sort of opening shots, isn't it, really? And as you said, it was very aggressive by the sounds of it. But is Rosalind Ranson's team, holding up well?
Well, today was all about the respondents, the government, making their case. And clearly their case is, let's try and discredit or break the appellant, Rosalind Ranson, which is a disgraceful way to behave, in my opinion, in a remedy hearing. It hasn't quite finished. I think there is approximately another hour's questioning to go through tomorrow morning. And then it will be the turn of the Rosalind Ranson's casee to respond to the case put by the government, which he's indicated should not take as long. And then I think we're going to hear either tomorrow or Friday, I'm not quite sure which, hear from a couple of experts who will get evidence one way or the other. I'm not sure in which direction they will go. And then hopefully by Friday, the tribunal will complete its work and we will then have to wait for a judgment in due course.
Okay, Chris,
but
you're going to be covering it.
Not a pleasant experience today, and
you're
not
going to be
what
covering
I expected.
And
Not what should be repeated.
Yeah.
If government is going to be respected when it says, we will treat whistleblowers fairly. And at the centre of this, and you've heard me say this before, and I make no apology for repeating it, that my conclusion from today was there's something wrong with the way our Attorney General's office works. If this is the way the Attorney General's office, because in the end, they will be the source of this guidance, they will be the raison d'etre, or the thinking behind the way the tribunal was conducted today, that if they think that the answer is always to attack and be aggressive in every opportunity, at every opportunity, then we've got a problem. And the more this goes on, the less, the less confidence I've got in the AG's department. Actually, that suggests I have confidence. I don't. And if government's really serious about its work, then I think it's got to start addressing just what sort of Attorney General's office do we want here, because right now it's the wrong one.